It's all a big misunderstanding. Have you ever heard those words before? What's probably even more frustrating is when someone else tells you those words, right? Usually you hear them after a big foul up. And with those words accompany a look of frustration, disappointment, who knows, maybe even a little bit of anger. There's this interesting story that comes from January of just this past year, 2015. It's the story of a California mother who said that when she was at a convenience store, at a gas station, that there were two men who offered to buy her baby at a convenience store for $100. Really troubling, right? Well, after the encounter with the two men, of course, the woman went to the police and she claimed that these men were child traffickers and that the people used surveillance video to get the word out to news agencies to find the men. Of course, they would want to catch these kinds of guys, right? Well, one of the men was a guy named Rolando Garcia, and he was a trucking company owner. The other guy was a pastor. Yeah, he was a pastor. And when the video was on the news, his employees came and told him that he was all over the news. This trucking guy, Rolando, his employees told him this, and he wondered why. What happened was when Rolando was in the checkout line at this convenience store, he went up to this young mother with some money because he saw the situation that she was in. And so he tried to give her some cash, and he told her, he says, I am so blessed, and I want to give this to you and for your child. Well, she had a big misunderstanding. She goes, no, and she takes it really wrong, and she walks away. Well, again, a few minutes later, Rolando saw her in the parking lot and offered the money again. He tried to give her $100, and he told her, he said, here, take it. I want to give it to you and for your child. Well, she was shocked, of course. She thought the guy was trying to buy her kid. And she calls the police. And so the police... She tells the police that she was intimidated by the men, and when the police kind of put it together, they thought, something isn't quite right here. Well, Rolando, of course, later sees himself on the news, and so he comes to the police, and he explains what happens. So the detectives, they kind of check out the story, and they check out the background. They even talk to the mother again, and they find out, indeed, it had been one big misunderstanding. It sure was. Well, what if I told you the book of the Revelation may have been, for many of us, a big misunderstanding? And I bet that as I do, through the years of reading the book, you've probably been frustrated by it, maybe even a little bit disappointed. Who knows, maybe even a little bit angry that a book in the Bible could cause so much misunderstanding. Well, let me tell you, of course it isn't God's fault. The misunderstanding has been on our end. Well, what do I mean? Well, maybe we've made the book out to be something that it wasn't meant to be. Maybe we've made it out to be a riddle book, waiting for answers to be unlocked. And then the frustrating part is when we unlock them, we find that there's new pieces that we have to unlock. It seems like the riddle just keeps going on and on. Well, I want you to know that God is not a God of confusion. He didn't give us the book of Revelation to confound and confuse us. Well, how do I know? Well, I look at the rest of the Bible. The rest of the Bible is very readable. It's applicable, isn't it? It's touched our lives. It's touched our world. It's given us a clear answer on how we can live life, how we can serve God and love others. So why would Revelation be any different? Well, let me tell you, it's all been a misunderstanding. This book means something for us, and it really is not that hard to figure out. And so as we come into chapter 1 of Revelation, we find the Apostle John exiled on the island of Patmos. The disciple whom Jesus loved is receiving the banishment that came with following Jesus, with following that love. But he wasn't forgotten. Jesus hadn't forgotten him, no. There was no misunderstanding. He was exactly where God wanted him to be. Because on Patmos, John sees the most amazing of places, and he meets the most amazing of people. You know, that second part there, people, is maybe often the most forgotten part of this book, the book of Revelation. You know, we usually focus on the streets of gold and the crystal sea, and yeah, they are pretty amazing. But what we learn about are the people in heaven. And the one person that we learn about the most is the Jesus in heaven. And that's really the main push of this book. See, we meet a Jesus in chapter 1 who is very different than the one that we read about in the Gospels, and yet, not really. Yeah, it's the same Jesus, but in heaven, as John meets him, we see a different side of him. When John enters heaven, he hears the voice of Jesus, and wow, is it really different than the one he remembers walking on those dusty roads with him or sitting around a table eating with him. No, he meets a Jesus unlike the one he had known before. Here he meets a Jesus who's filled with this power and authority, with this deep passion in his eyes. And in the moment, he is confronted with the very person that holds everything, including him and including you and me. He confronts this Jesus that holds all of us. And well, in the midst of this, John is overcome. I mean, wouldn't you be? I mean, in that moment, he finds that victory is not because of his faith or his deeds or his love or anything else for that matter. He has victory because of the one who confronts him. Jesus is that victory. And so over the coming weeks as we go through the book, we are going to be amazed at the sights and the sounds, yes, and even the smells of the book. But what was confounding and I think it will amaze us the most is the person at the center of it. It's Jesus. It's Jesus that brings the victory, that makes us victorious. So I want to challenge you. Don't take your eyes off him as you read, because if you do, this whole book is going to be one big misunderstanding.